And we bring to the show Dr. Mark A. Bernard. He is a postdoctoral scholar at NYU's Grossman School and a PhD in chemistry and a clinical epidemiologist. And I figured we might want to come to somebody with the actual expertise to understand what's going on. Because understand, anybody like me who has a podcast or a stream, we are nothing but laymen who are trying to interpret information. Welcome, Dr. Bernard. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm happy you were willing to talk to us because it seems that ever since COVID 19 broke out, we've had cross sections of people online or in the media who have all of a sudden become virologists and discovered that they know everything about vaccines and about how these things spread. So I figured we would get some information from someone who actually does. So I guess let's start simple. Can you explain to us what an epidemiologist does? Because I have gotten to the point now where I just refer to you all as public health experts. And but can you give us a little better definition than that?
Sure. So, you're not too far off, Brad. Epidemiology comes from some Greek words: epi, among, demos, the people, logos, the study. So, the study of what is among the people. So, what epidemiologists do is they look at disease, how it spreads among a population, how it gets into a population, and what kind of interventions we can do about those kinds of diseases and conditions.
So so basically, what we're saying is any disease that gets into a population comes down to you all for to study and to make sure that people understand how to deal with it.
Yeah, and not just epidemiologists, but also you mentioned earlier virologist. You mentioned, I'm also my PhD is actually in chemistry, so guys in the lab who make drugs, and novel therapeutics. It's up to all of us. But what an epidemiologist does is kind of on the front line of public health. We look at the statistics. We look at how many people might be infected in a population, how fast something spreads, a lot of biostatistical math and modeling that I'm pretty good at. Not great. Could be better. Um, but all of that comes together for public health purposes.
And I mean, that's also why we have teams. Before we get too far into the weeds here, I have recently become aware of the Vaccine Awareness Coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm over in the New York City area. For those of you watching from various places in the United States and around the world, um, the Vaccine Awareness Coalition is kind of a crack team of scientists at various universities around the New York City area. We, as you have tonight, Brad, we kind of got tired of some of the misinformation and disinformation that's going around about COVID 19, about vaccines. And, we put together some slides and some materials and went out into the community and started talking about it. So, we don't even have a we don't even have a website because we're totally unsanctioned by our respective universities. But we do have an email that's at a vaccine awareness coalition at gmail.com, where you can reach all of us.
And I'll make
We're just
sure
trying
that
to get,
eventually makes it into the description, but um,
yes, indeed. And really, what we're trying to do is just get real information out there. Um, that's our goal.
okay. Hey, we at this point, it seems that while we are of course dealing with COVID and its pandemic, we're dealing with several other pandemics that are happening at the same time. We're also dealing with greed, stupidity, and misinformation. And those seem to all be feeding into each other while while COVID runs through the populations in some places relatively unchecked. I guess I should probably ask you some of the more pointed questions. So I guess let's start with some general things, and then we can kind of narrow the conversation just to COVID-19. And of course, the
Sure.
audience had a few questions that they're welcome to put more in the chat if they have. I'll make sure I ask Dr. Bernard them before he leaves us. Can you explain to us, because we hear a lot of these terms, but to laymen they don't really mean much. As we
Hmm.
move through different strains from Alpha to Delta and now to Omicron, one we've been hearing about is how, while the virulence seems to have changed, and I'll ask you more about that in a moment, but just the overall rate of spread. Can you explain to us what an R-Naught is?
Sure. So R-Naught, it's much more complicated than what I'm about to say. But in a nutshell, R-Naught is kind of a measure of the number of people a disease can spread to from one infected person. So you go from something relatively that doesn't spread very quickly, like Ebola or the original SARS, which has an R-Naught value of 2. Okay, and then you have something that spreads like wildfire, something like measles, which has an R-Naught of around 18. And then you have things like chickenpox, which is well known to be a highly contagious disease with an R-Naught of around 10. Um, so there's a lot of things that go into it. R-Naught is not inherent to a particular disease, but it's rather a mathematical construct that talks about in a population that's not vaccinated, that's not socially distanced, that's just roaming around like normal humans do,
Normal
how
free
fast would it
range
spread into
humans.
normal free range humans, 100% organic, normal free range humans? How fast and to how many people would this disease spread if left unchecked from one infected person?
So, do we do we have like has Omicron been around long enough for them to calculate a working R naught on it, or are we still in that process?
We are still in that process right now. The estimates are, okay, just for reference, if we think of the original OG alpha strain of coronavirus of COVID-19, that had an R naught of about 2 to 3. We'll call it 3. Um, Delta, when it came along, which already seems like a long time ago, had an R naught of around 6 or 7. Um,
Okay.
it is estimated that Omicron has an R naught that's between 1.5 to 2 times that of the Delta strain. So we're looking at anywhere from 8 to perhaps 12 or 13. Um, this is a
S-
real fast spreader.
so if I wanted to put this down into a and make it as simple as possible, so we could estimate, let's say the R naught falls at 10, that for every infected person that, for instance, doesn't go into quarantine and just continues to live their normal lives, that we would expect them to spread that to 8 or 10 people before they stop being contagious.
That's right.
Okay. So, I mean, that in itself tells us some of the utility for quarantines and isolation, but there's also a few things that you hear often, but that don't seem to make sense to me, and I wanted to see if maybe you could put some of those in context. Um, you often hear people in rural areas more often, because one thing we've known about this country that's been more exposed and far easier to point to is the division. And the number one indicator for whether people will be vaccinated or unvaccinated is political affiliation. And in
Hmm.
these heavily rural Republican areas, you hear, for instance, people like Governor DeSantis in Florida talking about how they were right and everybody else was wrong on the science. And it seems like they benefit, one, from not only the weather being warmer and people not having to be inside more, but also from a lack of relative population density to these places where major outbreaks happen. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. So, as with so many things that we've heard throughout this pandemic, there's a grain of truth to what Governor DeSantis and the folks in Florida are saying, in that lower population density will mean, less quick spread. Um, Spread does increase as a function of population density. As there are more people around in closer proximity, this disease will spread much more quickly. So there is a grain of truth to that. What goes unsaid by some of the folks who say, well, we've done the right thing, we followed the science, and this is proof of it. Um, what goes unsaid is that all it takes is for somebody from one of these less dense areas to be in proximity with people who may travel and spread out to other places. Um, we've seen we've seen numerous examples over the course of the pandemic where people who have been infected in one area have traveled elsewhere, have become there's been super spreader events in places that may not have been so densely populated, but all it takes is for someone to go to a densely populated place and easily spread the disease. So there's quite a bit of context missing from statements like that.
So, the first thing that would come to my mind hearing that would be the Sturgis motorcycle rally from last year
You
in the
read my mind,
Dakotas.
Brad.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I am on the right track there. Because you do seem to have people gather in these large areas and they're gathering, they're maskless, they're not following any of our protocols and we're pretending like this thing isn't happening. But and then of course, people naturally travel. And of course, in America, there's not like there's borders on individual states. People can move about as they please, and in some ways, our dogma around being free to do as we please is not always good for our society. But I did have some questions that are just directly COVID-19 related, outside of just the general science around how some of this stuff works. Um,
Mhm.
and this, of course, is an audience question, but I know everybody's asking it, so I might as well go ahead and put it on Front Street. Um,
Sure.
if we know when, but more so, how will we know when the pandemic's over?
When will the pandemic be over?
Or at least how will we
I
know
was
when we're going to be over? I know we can't like pinpoint a month or anything like that.
I would say when we get to a point at which the spread is contained. And what I mean by contained is that where we have a sustained time period of, R not less than one, um, when we have sustained decrease in deaths and positivity rates and case counts, similar to what we had actually this past summer. Um, Here in the tri-state area where I live, around New York City, there were a few days back in, I want to say, late June and early July of this past year, 2021, where there were no cases, no deaths, um, there was about a week where there was just things that kind of flatlined.
Was this
Obviously,
right prior
Delta
to Delta?
showed up, and
Okay.
this was prior to Delta, yes. So Delta showed up, and then those case counts went back up. But I would say we can start to celebrate a bit if we had something like that for a sustained time period. And some might be asking, well, what's a sustained time period? And,
That was
like
going to
so
be the
many things in
follow up.
epidemiology, yeah, like so many things in epidemiology and in looking at the rates of spread of disease, there's no hard and fast rule or specific time. I'd say if we went, from this is just, one scientist's view, if we went in that direction for, I'd say, between 2 weeks and a month of nice, flat lines, you know, no full ICUs, and a place in which the healthcare system could handle it, um, I'd say we'd be in a very good position, whenever
Oh,
that may or may not be.
I of course I have some questions about whether our society will allow for a return to normal. And see, the problem is some people are gonna. I need to tease that thought out because some people are gonna hear that and they're gonna think it comes from conspiratorial reasoning. What I am saying is I'm not sure as a society we're capable of suppressing the and I guess let me find a nice way to put it, the individualistic spirit that runs through American society. Because and I mean, this is just from looking at the ways different countries have dealt with this. It seems like countries that are more communal are doing a better job handling this. There's more of a desire and incentive to look out for your neighbor. I was trying to explain to somebody, talking about the school at which I teach, still being remote this entire time, almost for a year and a half now. And somebody's like, "This is ridiculous. The kids need to be back in school," and I will always counter with the same thing. One, how safe is it for the kids to be in school with a novel virus we're still learning about? And why are more people not concerned more about the health of their family than they are about what they have to do out in the world? And some of that, of course, is the pressures placed on them by capitalism to go out and earn just to maintain having a roof over their head. So, I mean, I'll keep fighting that political battle, but I guess let me take it back on track. But no, we are not talking about how governments are trying to control people and how this is all about control, because I've yet to find
And
somebody to be able to back that statement or thought up.
yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. Obviously, it's an individual, in no way, shape, or form on behalf of New York University Grossman School of Medicine. Have to throw that disclaimer in there. You know what it is, Brad.
Of course.
But, but American culture. As a scientist who follows the science and follows the data, wherever it may lead, I'm not really sure what you do about that aspect of things. About I think, as he euphemistically called it, the individualistic spirit. Um,
That's
you
that's
know,
me
you
putting it
can't.
as nicely as I possibly can.
Oh yeah, and it has its pros and cons. America, for all its flaws. Having lived overseas, as you do, Brad. Being American does have its perks. I'm glad I am an American. That being said, there are many aspects of our culture as Americans that are antithetical to public health, particularly in a case like this. Um, there are quite a good bit of people who are unwilling to make even the smallest sacrifices, um, in the name of the greater good, and that's somewhat disappointing.
Like,
Uh,
it seems like instead of even being able to get people to contemplate like wearing masks when you're inside around other people, we can't even get people to wear a mask from the front of the restaurant to the table and then take it off. We can't even get them to do it for 3 or 4 minutes, much less. Like I we frustrate me because at this point it seems like our culture and all the things we've interjected into our society are what's killing us more than anything else. The
well, I will say this. I will say this. It's understandable that some people are scared, some people are very frustrated with the measures that that folks like myself and others are trying to put in place to help us, slow the spread of this virus. It is. I mean, it's understandable. I'm sitting here gaining weight because I can't really go to the gym like I used to, because I don't want to go there and breathe in, something that's going to make me sick. Um, However, much of these guidelines are based in the data, some of which, maybe I'll be able to share with you tonight. I there's a lot of science behind some of these guidelines, as far as masking, social distancing, um, and the vaccines that will be helpful for us going forward.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of the vaccines, I guess we probably should try to talk about some of the things we hear people say, um, and and try to try to vet it honestly and figure out how true it is. So, I guess when you're ready, we can play vaccine myth whack a mole.
Ah, yes, let's do that.
All right, so let's I guess let's start with basic ones that we've heard for a million years. Um, Vaccines. Why should I put vaccines? It turns out vaccines cause autism. That hurt even saying.
Well, vaccines don't cause autism. So this myth came from a study. I'll put study in quotes. A paper that was many years ago. It has been thoroughly debunked, thoroughly discredited. Um, Vaccines don't cause autism. The COVID-19 vaccines, in particular, don't have any ingredients in them that would cause any neurocognitive defects, any kind of changes. Um, Vaccines don't cause autism and never have. The idea that that came from has been thoroughly debunked time and time again since that
And didn't the
study
guy who
was
did
released.
the study end up losing his medical license?
I believe so. I can't remember the guy's name now, but I believe that he did.
Yeah,
Um,
because it seemed like, and I know that we, and I mean even I to a large extent, are a scientifically illiterate populace in some ways, um, and it seems like people forget that science is not some thing that's set in stone like it's put on tablets. It's an evolving thing, and we learn things over time.
that's
So,
absolutely right.
like, how do you even? I don't even begin to get people to understand that because it seems like we're always putting scientists at a disadvantage because they have to debunk some person who read Alex Jones's blog on the toilet, or watch Joe Rogan talk to Peter McCullough when Peter McCullough doesn't represent anything approaching a medical or scientific consensus. He just represents what's good for him in his pockets. Actually, speaking of pockets, I guess let's look at whack a mole number two. This entire vaccine rollout and everything is just a scheme by big pharma to make money. What would you say to that?
I'll say this about big pharma making money. Um,
This keep in mind
Here's
this is
how.
coming from people who never cared about big pharma until they didn't want to take a vaccine.
Well, I'll say this about big pharma making money. Big pharma. First of all, big pharma doesn't need to invent a pandemic to make money. Big pharma will make money regardless.
Thank you.
That's point number one. Um, Point number two is this, and this is how I've put it to many people as I've given vaccine talks around New York City to various schools and things. Um, Even if even if we assume that that was true, um, there is still a deadly virus out there that has killed 700 plus thousand people in the United States and many more around the world. Um, Even if big pharma were making big money off of the production of vaccines, which, I assume they are making some money. They've done a lot of R&D. Governments have been purchasing vaccines from them. We know that Merck is developing a COVID-19 treatment pill. So sure, there's money to be made from those things. Uh, that, however, does not negate the severity of the virus and of the pandemic. So, for me personally, and this is something I try to say to all of you and to people I come in contact with, um, I don't see what big pharma making money and taking measures to protect ourselves and protect society from this disease really have to do with one another. That's my answer to that.
I mean, it does seem like they're separate conversations because the issues with big pharma didn't just start to exist. Like, yeah, it's a problem, but that doesn't mean that there's not a disease out there. And along that same line, um, what would your response be to the laboratory Wuhan theory? I know, I'm sorry. I apologize for even asking it.
No, no. To me, it doesn't hold water. There's not for a lot of these conspiracy theories, and I will call the Wuhan lab bioweapon um, theory a conspiracy theory. Um, there's not much evidence that supports that. Um, Listen, anything can be true. There could be dinosaurs on Mars or something for all we know. You know, we don't know. But the evidence is not there to support that. We do, however, have lots of evidence that this is from some animal vector that did, originate somewhere in Wuhan and spread around the world. Um, this idea that it's some kind of bioweapon. Now, listen, if I'm proven wrong later, I'll be the first to come on this very stream and say so. But the evidence just isn't there for that. There's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot of speculation, but no evidence for that. And lots of evidence for other scenarios, such as this spreading from an animal vector into humans.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it better not prove to be true because I don't want to have to come on and do a I was wrong video. Um, but
But you know what, Brad? I'll say to your point about science being messy, what a lot of people who are not scientists don't realize is as scientists, we have to do that all the time. Sometimes you are wrong. Sometimes new evidence comes out that, you know, kind of puts us under a previous theory. Um, and you have to say, you know what, that evidence and that data is a better explanation than mine was. That happens all the time. That's how science is refined. That's how we learn the things that we do. Um, I don't, I'm not holding my breath for that Wuhan lab thing, though.
I mean, neither am I, thank goodness. And well, and I guess let's deal with that particular thread and just finish it all the way off. So, with people saying that this virus could be man-made, and I mean, obviously the evidence points to it being zoonotic instead, but let's pretend for the purposes of this conversation that that's true. Um, would that make a difference in how people should deal with the virus in terms of masking and vaccinations? What practical difference does the origin of the virus make to how people should deal with it in their everyday lives?
From where I stand, Brad, none. Um, you know, if in the future we do learn that this was man-made and that this is a bioweapon and that people like me were wrong, it still doesn't matter. It may matter for legal reasons, for for bringing the people responsible to some sort of justice. Um, but I'll leave that to folks above my pay grade to decide. As far as the science is concerned, as far as the public health is concerned, as far as the epidemiology is concerned, it doesn't really mean anything. Um, this virus is still spreading quickly. It still turns people's lungs into ground glass for all intents and purposes, um, and causes people to suffocate and die. Uh, and now it's spreading faster than ever with this Omicron variant and with the very deadly and still out there Delta variant. Um, so I
We
don't think it
totally
really changes
forget that the
anything.
Delta variant is even still there because Omicron takes up all of the space in the media sphere. Like, you forget that that's even
Yeah,
there, and it's still out there putting people in the ICU the same way. Um,
it is. It is.
well, I guess we do have a few more. I'll try to get these out a little quicker. Okay, so one thing you always hear people say is that the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting COVID. Um, could you add some context to that so that it makes a little more sense? Because I don't seem to understand that. Doesn't seem to be the way I understand the science to work.
Sure. So look at it from a scientific perspective. So COVID-19 is the disease, and SARS-CoV-2, you might have heard that name in the media or seen that online. That's the virus. So if you're walking around in this world breathing in, because this is a respiratory illness that travels through the air, because this virus is airborne, there's really nothing stopping you from breathing it in at any given time. If you're out there and you're exposed to somebody who has this virus in them and they breathe it out, or you're near, I don't know, some source of it and you breathe it in, it can still get into your body. The virus can still be there. What changes when you're vaccinated is that you are able to produce more antibodies against the virus. This gets into something that we call viral load. I don't know if you've heard that term, but viral load is basically how much virus do you have in your body? And if you think about viral load, think of I don't know, a line, a threshold below which you won't get sick and above which you will. Get sick with COVID 19, the disease, and to have all the symptoms and horrible things you've heard about, you have to have enough virus in your body to actually elicit that response. And what happens when you're vaccinated is the virus might be in your body, but because of your immune response, because of your antibodies going to work and doing their thing, particularly if you've been vaxxed and boosted, the virus doesn't have a chance to get above this line. Never have enough viral load to get sick, even though the virus is still in your body. Your immune system kills it before it can gain enough of a foothold to get you sick.
How different is that? Um, how different is that process in the body of somebody who hasn't been vaccinated?
Well, in the body of someone who hasn't been vaccinated, your immune system will still go to work. I mean, your immune system doesn't stop working. However, it has no warning. It has no warning whatsoever. Imagine, trying to think of a good example. Um,
In
now
some ways,
imagine
it's almost like there not being an alarm in the most important secure site that you possess, your own body.
exactly. There you go, Brad.
Yeah, I mean,
Imagine there not being an alarm. You know,
I was about to say
if
an alarm,
somebody,
especially if one of the possibilities for that alarm not going off is death.
yeah, or even a smoke detector, right? That's
Some sort of
if
advance
you have
warning that there's a problem before the problem blows your house down.
comes a problem. Yeah, exactly. And you might think of it, and somebody who's not vaccinated, that alarm never goes off. It's not there. The batteries are dead. Whatever analogy you'd like to use. And by the time your immune system wakes up, well, the house is on fire. Whereas on the other hand, with somebody vaccinated, you have plenty of advance warning. Your antibodies and white blood cells are at the ready because they have been primed by the vaccine to kill invaders, kill the virus when it comes in.
I mean,
But yeah, the
because
alarm system's a good analogy. Nice
We
save, Brad.
I mean, if nothing else, that's the benefit of coming from English teachers is you do have analogies. Um, thank you, Mama and Daddy. Okay. All right. So there's a few more I wanted to make sure I asked. People saying that COVID cases are fake and they're counting random deaths as COVID deaths. Is that something we even really want to deal with, or is that just too conspiratorial for us to address?
I'll address it by saying the same thing I said about the, I can say what I'll say about all these conspiracy theories, and it makes the jobs of people like myself harder. Um, there's just no evidence for that. Um, no, there's no evidence that the COVID numbers have been faked, and even if they were faked, okay. Even if we accept that they were faked, it would not change what we need to do to prevent infection, sickness, and spread. Um, I'll go a step further and say, in order to fake those numbers, we take the participation of thousands upon thousands of medical professionals, scientists like myself, politicians, not just in the United States, not just in single states or even countries, but across the world. People who don't know one another, people who don't communicate with one another, people who really have no motive for such a deception. And it would take an enormous amount of coordination for purposes that some of the folks who promulgate these theories haven't really given.
Haven't even really factored into their thought process. Um,
Yeah.
because what's that old saying? The only way two people can keep a secret is if one of them is dead. I mean, COVID is going to keep a whole lot of people from telling secrets, but it's not going to. There's no way that that number of people. It's like the moon landing being fake. If there was any evidence of that, somebody would have given it up. Like, people don't hold water like that.
Yeah, and it would just, and again, like I said about the Wuhan bioweapon thing, you know, could it be true in theory? I suppose, sure, anything could be true in theory, but where's the evidence for that? One can either imagine that thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, however many medical professionals and politicians and public health professionals, etc., there are around the world are in on this large scale deception for some nebulous, nefarious purpose, or can say, well, perhaps there really is a disease going around that's killing millions of people. One of those two things is true, and I'll say that one of them
One
is
of those
is
things is
highly
true, observable, and provable.
exactly
Like, we can
verifiable,
measure COVID
demonstrable.
numbers. We can't measure that. We can't measure conspiratorial thinking. And where do you go from
Yes,
there?
well,
And it leads people in some directions. And I guess we'll look at this one as one and the same. You constantly hear people say it doesn't stop you from getting it, and another thing that comes in tandem with that is people saying vaccinated people are spreading this more than unvaccinated people.
all right. So
Yeah, I know.
to address that, doesn't stop you from getting it. Well, you know, a seatbelt might not stop you from being seriously injured or killed in a car accident. Um, doesn't mean it's a good idea not to wear one. The vaccine, it lessens the chance of serious illness or death substantially. Um, I think the latest data, I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but in ICUs across the United States, more than 98% of people in intensive care units have not been vaccinated against COVID-19. Um, that's a
So out
really
of
remarkable
50
number.
people, that would be 49 out of those 50 people would be unvaccinated.
That's correct. And that 50th person who might be in the ICU who is vaccinated almost always either has comorbidities or, now this is something the data does show. I'd say, I don't have a percentage for you, I'd have to look at the numbers, but the majority of people who die who are vaccinated are over the age of 80. So
And I mean,
people
shoot, if
who
I
are
make
in
it to 80, I'm already calling it a miracle.
I could only hope, man. I could only hope to make it to 80. Um, but yeah, as Brad just said, 49 out of 50 people, 98 out of 100 people who are in ICUs are unvaccinated. Those other two have something else going on, some other condition, or are the very elderly.
And I mean, it's hard in a society where people don't really trust the institutions anymore. And this is a large global problem that an individual person can't solve. And it's scary. So I could understand why people would have a lot of questions and a lot of theories would pop up. Like, this one I understand probably more than a lot of it. Um, what about myocarditis with the vaccine as a concern? And for those of
Uh,
us who don't understand what myocarditis is, feel free to tease that out for us as well.
sure. So myocarditis is basically swelling of the heart. Um, and So that actually, unlike some of the conspiracies, there is actual data that shows, yes, there are some people, mostly young men under the age of 30, who have received either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, one of the mRNA vaccines. There have been cases of myocarditis among that population. Um, what goes unsaid, however, is that in the United States, I don't have numbers for the rest of the world, as of today, and I actually checked these numbers before we came on, Brad, um, and nearly 540 million doses of vaccine given in the United States as of today, which is January the 22nd. I think it's the 23rd where you are, Brad.
Yeah.
Um, and there have been, of all of those vaccines given, CDC has verified 1,200 cases of myocarditis. So it isn't something that I can say isn't real because it is. There have been a few isolated cases of myocarditis. 1,200 out of no a million bajillion cases is literally less than a one in a million chance. Something else I'll say about the myocarditis: there are two types of myocarditis. One that is from lymphocytes, lymphocytic myocarditis, and there's also another type that has to do with white blood cells that is far more severe. This is time and time again seen to be the less severe version of myocarditis that's easily treatable with rest and some medicines within a few days. So these people who get myocarditis recover for the most part.
So the myocarditis that people get from COVID, how does that compare to the myocarditis that people could potentially get from the vaccine?
I haven't. I'll have to look at that honestly, Brad. I haven't broken out those numbers of myocarditis from the disease. What I will say is that other heart diseases and other, well, we're finding now is that there's a lot of vascular damage that arises from COVID-19. So not just limited to the heart, but obviously the lungs and other parts of the body um, that results from COVID-19. I'd have to look at those numbers, Brad, because I'm actually not sure how the myocarditis numbers compare. I do know that I do know that the damage is more severe with the disease than without.
Along that same line, the other thing that I often hear people say is that they don't know what's in the vaccine and that they should have the right to know what goes in their bodies. How do you typically respond when somebody tells you that?
Well, sure, you have. Well, first of all, it's not a secret what's in the vaccine. Okay, I'll tell you right now. mRNA, which you've heard about, which is a small piece of RNA that gives your cells some instructions how to make small pieces of the spike protein of COVID-19. That's what trips your immune system to start making antibodies. So there's a piece of mRNA. There are fatty acids, okay? Fatty acids, which are what protect the mRNA as it gets injected into your body. And there's some salts and sugars, and that's pretty much it. Um, these mRNA vaccines are actually pretty simple. Um, and then if you have there are other types of vaccines than mRNA. There's Johnson and Johnson here in the United States. There's AstraZeneca in other parts of the world that are made from a deactivated cold virus um, that has parts of COVID on it that stimulate your immune system to make antibodies against COVID. However, this virus is deactivated, incapable of infection, incapable of replication.
And
Um,
what type of vaccine are like Sinopharm and Sinovac? Are those similar to the AstraZeneca?
I'm actually not sure about Sinopharm. I believe Sinopharm is an mRNA vaccine. I could be wrong on that. That I'll have to check.
Yeah,
I
I know
actually don't.
this is tailored very narrowly for like the one non-American viewer. We see you out there, homie. Um, but
I'll check on it for you. I promise.
oh, and the one other that I wanted to get into, the last one when the pandemic first started, I heard a lot of people pointing to Sweden and talking about how Sweden had achieved herd immunity. Could you explain to us what herd immunity is? And then I will come back and explain why it's problematic that a bunch of right wingers would point to an all white country and say they handled it via herd immunity and we should all do the same thing they did.
Okay, so first of all, I just checked Sinopharm really quickly. Sinopharm is like Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca. It's an inactivated virus.
Okay.
It's not mRNA. So there you go for our non-American viewer out there. Um, then to the Can you ask that question one more time, Brad? Sorry. So why is it problematic to?
Um, well, well, just in general, it's it comes from seemingly that same impulse. We've often heard right wingers say the problems that, like, when somebody will point to a Denmark, for instance, and say we should emulate some of those policies. You will often hear right wingers say we can't implement things like that because our population is too diverse. They're monochromatic. They don't have to deal with those problems, which basically is saying those things only work because a country is all white. Like, they're not as subtle and slick with that dog whistle as they think they are. So they pointed to Sweden as a shining example of herd immunity, and then a month or two later, everything was sweeping through Sweden, and that turned out to be bullshit, just like I was saying it was at the beginning. So
Right.
what is herd immunity? Because I don't think we understand it. At least I know my understanding is limited. Okay, so herd immunity. Okay, so I see the numbers, but please explain because I don't fully understand.
Okay, so let me see. Oh, perfect. I hope you can now.
Yeah, if I
Are
need to
you able to
scroll,
play
just
the
let me
little
know.
animation? There's a cool little animation that should be able to play on that slide.
Oh God.
I don't know if you
Okay,
could
nah.
play it.
All right, now that's probably not going to happen. But I want y'all to imagine things moving around. I want you all to imagine that. Okay,
All
so
right. Well,
we obviously see that this
unfortunately,
first blue box over here is bad. What does the rest of this represent?
right. So it's hard to see, but if you can imagine that in the center of each of these six rectangles is somebody who is infected. That's a little black dot. Not sure you guys could see it,
Yeah, it's
but there's a
right
little black dot which
here, it looks
represents
like. In
that
all the
Brad pointed
same
out for the
spot.
folks at home.
Yeah, right here for the people. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. They can't see my cursor. All right, y'all. Pretend you can see my cursor. All right, go ahead, Dr. Bernard. Sorry.
Yes, well, each of these, in the center of each of these squares, is a black dot that represents an infected person. The blue dots are unvaccinated people. The yellow dots are vaccinated people. And what you would have seen if we could play our cool little animation is the pathway of a virus moving through this population. And what you would see is that around that 75% mark of people being vaccinated, you'll see that that spread slows down tremendously. And once you get to 90% and over, it slows almost completely. So, what herd immunity is, just to go back to Brad's original question, is the percent of people. It's a state of a population at which enough people are vaccinated or otherwise protected from infection that basically the disease doesn't have many places to go. It's not able to spread as quickly. It doesn't have as many hosts to jump to. Now, the immediate follow up I often get when describing herd immunity is, well, wait a minute, can't COVID still be spread and still be caught by vaccinated people? And yes, the answer is yes, it can. However, as I spoke about earlier, the viral load is below the threshold where that person can get sick. And also, when the viral load is low, that person has a much lower transmission as well. So, although the vaccine doesn't stop spread entirely, if you are vaccinated, a transmission rate goes down precipitously by several times below a person who is unvaccinated.
Doesn't and I guess speaking back to the vaccinated versus unvaccinated part,
Mhm.
um, from what I understand, people who are vaccinated are sick for a shorter period of time and have a shorter window in which they are contagious. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. And that goes back to the whole idea of viral load. Because, even if the virus is in a vaccinated person's body, the immune system is already in a ready state, can kill the infection quickly before it can get to a point where the viral load is over that threshold.
And wouldn't that mean on some level that anyone who is that if for some reason, if we were to follow this thread, that people say that vaccinated people are spreading it more than unvaccinated people, um, it seems like it would poke a hole in that just in general. But it also seems that the people who are vaccinated are more likely to still be wearing masks, to still be social distancing, and to still be following protocols. I just don't understand how that particular theory works. What do you say to people when they come in with some hesitancy? What do you say when they tell you that?
Well, first of all, Brad, the idea of vaccine shedding is it's nonsense. I don't have nice euphemisms for this one. It's not. It just isn't true.
We're trying to
Um,
vet these things and honestly and as empathetically as we can, y'all. But some of it
yes,
just doesn't
yes,
make sense to a working mind.
yes. The idea of vaccinated people shedding the disease to those who are unvaccinated. Um, I'd go as far as to say that that's the opposite of truth. And, regarding people's hesitancy about the vaccine, um, I've talked to many people who a lot of it is rooted in fear. Um, Spoke to one parent of a young child a few months back. Uh, Here in the United States, the vaccine was approved for children ages 5 to 11. And her son had had an adverse reaction to a vaccine previously, and she was worried about this one. And I had another parent who asked, well, my child has heart problems. Should I give him the vaccine? Um, so, Brad, for everybody who has a political reason um, to be against vaccinations and mask mandates, etc., there are a lot of people who are afraid.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are there to profit off of that fear. We call those people the Jimmy Dores and the Alex Joneses of the world.
Exactly, exactly. And what I say to the people who are hesitant, I say, at the end of the day, you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to listen to anybody. You can always do as you please with your body. That's true. There are a few things to consider, though. First of all, this is different from cancer or AIDS or some of the other diseases that we might know about or that folks like this compare COVID to, and that those aren't airborne. Can't Not going to go in a room and breathe and infect everyone else in the room with those diseases. So this is a little different, and that must be considered here. It's not just you, um, the individual, who should be considered. The other thing is, you know, the facts are out there that the disease is far worse than whatever side effects may arise from the vaccine. We've spoken about the 1,200 cases, verified cases of myocarditis. We didn't touch on it here tonight, but some of the deactivated virus vaccines, such as the Johnson and Johnson and the AstraZeneca, have had reports of blood clotting. Um, it's also a concern. However, when you compare the rates of blood clotting or myocarditis to the very real rates of disease and death from catching the actual virus, um, they are several times lower and sometimes much less than 1%. Um, Basically, what I say, Brad, to people who are hesitant is no, it's scary to take a new vaccine, one that was, you know, designed on a relatively fast time scale, um, one that's unknown to most non scientists. That's understandable. What's less understandable for me and for many people in the scientific community is that the real risk of catching the virus and having that wreak havoc on you um, in the absence of the vaccine. Many of these side effects, myocarditis, you know, uh, blood clotting, risks of these things are far higher with the actual virus than with the vaccine. The risk of death is far higher with the actual virus than with the vaccine. Many people point to the survival rate of COVID, 99 point something percent or whatever it is. I don't even know the exact number of the
They don't tend
survival
to
rate.
point to the long term health effects people seem to be suffering because that doesn't matter to
That's
them.
that's that's absolutely right, Brad. No, many people who survive, and I'll put survival in scare quotes, COVID. Some people make full recoveries, but many do not. Many have what's known as long COVID. They have breathing troubles for months, and in some cases, we're at the point where there are people who are years now, because ever since this pandemic started, who still have effects. Some people who have lost their senses of smell and taste um, on a semi permanent basis. Uh, some people who still can't do strenuous activity or need supplemental oxygen or have debilitating physical effects. And
And
the list goes on.
and people downplaying and people even saying, "Oh, 99% of people live." What does that really tell you about their mind state and about how much they actually value human life. Because I would argue if your reason for not protecting yourself and your neighbors from a disease is that only 1 out of 100 of your neighbors will die, then you don't actually give a shit about your neighbors. You only give a damn about your own comfort.
And and again, I'll throw in my disclaimer. I speak for myself and not for New York University. But if we look at the United States, you know, 1% of the U.S. population, it's like 4 million people. It's like 3.5 million people. Um, that's no small number of people. Um, had it not been for the vaccine, we might already be there in deaths in the United States. Um, you know, the death toll now stands at, um, so of today, I can look at the numbers right now. Here in the United States, the death toll is at 865,000 plus. So 1 million is not far off. And, I do question some of the folks who say, oh, it's only 1%. Um,
What
it's
about the people? They all have
865,000 real people.
families. This is 800,000 families have been interrupted. Kids who have lost, kids who have lost parents, parents who have lost their elders, um, kids whose teacher is never coming back to class. Like, we forget that those 800,000 deaths, even if you didn't care a single thing about the deaths, those deaths have affected millions of people's lives. And I'll even throw this one out here for the capitalists in there. There's jobs that people are never going to go back to. I don't give a damn about that, but they might.
And that's right. These are sadly there are some people in not just in the United States, but in many countries and societies around the world who see this pandemic in the abstract until it touches them personally. And it's my hope that folks like myself, elected officials, other people, folks like you, Brad, you know, can get the word out to people so that they realize, hey, no, yeah, 99% of people who get COVID, will probably survive, but that 1% is still a very heavy toll and a very heavy price to pay. And then even if you do survive, there could be lasting damage. Um, so
And
I,
this is
I think we're better served by taking precautions against this disease.
And part of that mindset is a problem that runs rampant the more conservative people are. This is not a problem until it comes to my backyard. It's the same reason why Republicans, a 95% white party, don't recognize problems with race. Um, it's this isn't an issue until it affects me. It's the same reason why you see Republican politicians be anti-gay until they have a gay kid, and all of a sudden they're accepting.
And so they
Now
come
that
out
it's in your
themselves.
life, they care. I know we only got a few more minutes. I don't want to hold you forever, but I did have one or two more questions, and if you're down for it, we can take a couple of audience questions. Okay, so I'll give you my last question, then we'll take any that the audience has. I appreciate
Okay.
y'all waiting for us, but as I understand it, the what we're going through right now for COVID is almost like a training simulator in some ways for our next pandemic, just with how much humans have encroached in animal populations and how much our spread is. It's that people are saying that we're almost guaranteed to see another one of these during the course of our lifetime. What can you say to people who are concerned about that, just in general?
Are we going to face another pandemic in our lifetimes? I hope not, but it would not surprise me if we did. We've actually gotten lucky to this point, especially here in the U.S. Some people don't remember, the SARS pandemic of the early 2000s, or MERS back
United
in
States of
10 years
Amnesia.
ago. United States of Amnesia, that's right. Um, so, this is kind of the big one so far, but I'm say, Brad, I'm not optimistic about the next pandemic. Um,
I
I've
really
been
wish we could learn something from this one before the next thing comes along and is before the Umbrella Corporation unleashes the T virus.
Yeah, because I've been really disappointed by how little people seem to have learned over the course of this pandemic, how politicized it's become, how distrusted um, scientists and medical professionals are. I mean, you mentioned earlier some names, Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, and I really do want to ask some of these folks, what is it that you, or rather, why is it that you trust Joe Rogan over a doctor? Um, it doesn't
They don't
it
even
doesn't
trust
make a
their
lot of sense
family
to me.
doctor. I don't understand what we're going to do. Because if we get another one
Yeah.
of these things and it's worse, at this point I say kiss the game goodbye. Because we are not doing a good job here.
Well, the hope is that, by getting out this information, some minds can be changed. And if not changed, at least some people who hadn't thought about things in a certain way maybe will. And, it's sometimes it's a war of attrition. Um, but I'll say my confidence, uh, and my faith in humanity has been, low as it was beforehand, has been shaken further. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I am a scientist and I have to look at the evidence and look at the data. And looking at the human data of this pandemic doesn't give me uh, a huge sense of confidence for the next one.
It's all
I
right.
hope
If
I'm wrong.
nothing else, we know you'll be there to help us talk about it and learn a little bit more along the way. So,
I
well,
appreciate it.
I guess let's pivot. You want to answer a few audience questions before we go?
Yeah, sure, sure.
All
I
right.
will do my best.
Make sure I let me make sure I have everything in place so I'm not overly confused when it's time to come back and edit. I already do a terrible job of doing it, so the audience knows that, but I don't want to put myself out there too badly. And for everybody who's hearing this, this is eventually going to make it to the YouTube page, so share it out. Make sure that people get this information if possible. If we can even keep one or two people from from dying alone, unable to see their families while gasping for air, we will have done a good thing. So, but I do have a question. Tsunamic Wave is asking about the lasting damage from COVID and if you can give us any specifics of the type of damage people are dealing with.
Okay, cool. So thanks for your question, Tsunamic Wave. So, um, well, the lasting damage is really concentrated. There's a lot of places that get lasting damage from long COVID. I mentioned the loss of smell and taste that can often persist for people months and months after the original infection has subsided. There's other things too. There are lasting lung damage as well. So, one of the things that COVID does is we don't know exactly the mechanism of it yet. We're kind of still doing investigations on that. What it looks like is that scar tissue builds up in the lungs from when the virus replicates in the cells of the lungs and bursts out. That scar tissue from the dead cells is kind of just left behind. Now, usually your mucous membranes and things get rid of all that. However, there's so much that oftentimes your lungs are not able to cope. So even after the infection is gone, many people have lasting lung damage, shortness of breath, um, and need supplemental oxygen. Even the people who don't need supplemental oxygen report that, just walking, from the couch to like the bathroom or something, um, wins them easily.
I
They
tell
can't walk
you,
upstairs and. Mhm.
that's the thing right there. That's what got me. Because people will say they're like, "Oh, Brad, you blah blah blah," and you know how people love to throw out accusations. Because we all had some level uh, of hesitancy at the beginning. I mean, that's just
Mhm.
natural, I think, for people to have, and then hopefully you get over it and move on to what you're supposed to do. But
Mhm.
I remember what
And
happened
then.
with Yon Moncada of the White Sox. Because people who follow the channel know I'm a huge White Sox fan. When I saw a
Mhm.
guy 12 or 13 years younger than me who's an athlete on a level I could never dream about saying he couldn't run from home plate to first base, that in itself would tell me that, yeah, you don't necessarily have to be 90 years old living in a nursing home for this to affect you. If it can take somebody who's got that much athletic ability and sap it so they can't run, what does that say to a rest of a population that subsist on big gulps and whoppers?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, this disease does not discriminate. You know, and I think one of the other there's a couple of other symptoms too. I mean, you alluded to it with the athlete. Besides being winded, there's also muscle fatigue. Persistent fatigue. Not being able to move around as much, not just from being winded, but from your body just being tired. Um, Maybe some of you have heard about brain fog. So COVID seems to have uh, elements of cognitive decline that lasts even after the infection is gone. More recently, I'm talking like in the last couple of weeks, there's been talk about microclots in the blood. Now, it's thought that some of the symptoms of long COVID might have something to do with microclots. So these aren't regular blood clots that we can see very easily. These are tiny clots that aren't picked up in a regular blood test that have inflammatory molecules inside the microclots throughout the body. And because they're so small, we haven't really been able to observe them with some of uh, the usual blood testing. And I'm actually going to read some more about that because I think that's interesting and that would explain some of the damage, some of the symptoms, I should say, that are happening in people with long COVID. Um, Something else I do at my job at NYU is I'm looking at Alzheimer's disease. And one of the preclinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and something we think that helps lead to it, is vascular damage. So those tiny microscopic blood vessels in the brain and well, all over your body, really, in your fingertips. When those get damaged, really interesting things can happen in the body. So that's kind of a newer angle on long COVID. But yeah, synamic wave to answer your question. Yeah, so brain fog, muscle fatigue, um, lung damage, and in some cases, permanent loss of taste and smell, just to name a few.
Hey, that's and let's see. I do have a couple, or at least one. I think I may have already asked a lot of them, but I do have one question coming from the peanut gallery because Lord, first of all, it's COVID 19. We should literally just throw all these people in the horny gulag, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the safest way for people to have sex under COVID 19?
um, have it have it with somebody who's vaccinated and maybe go with them to get tested. I mean, hey, with some people, if you're not strapped up, you got to get tested for other stuff anyway, right?
Right? Some of them would literally take the person they're dating and go have and go get an AIDS test together. Y'all can go get a little spit PCR test together before you get
I'm
down.
saying add COVID to the list.
I was about to say, first of all, every single person who's watching this has done way more for sex than get a PCR test. Okay, let's just put it out here. Don't act like y'all aren't used to making an effort. Okay, I know how y'all get down. I appreciate your time so much, Dr. Bernard. If anything new develops, I would appreciate you being willing to give us an update if you could. But I know you
Hey,
got
I've
to
had a
jump.
great.
Oh, make sure
I've had,
that the audience knows if there's a way for them to contact you. If there's any projects you think they should look at, the floor is yours. Tell the people how they can reach you.
well, I've had a great time here in the underground with you, Brad. I'd love to come back. Um, so can reach me at the Vaccine Awareness Coalition, Vaccine Awareness Coalition at gmail.com. Well, hit me up on the Vaccine Awareness Coalition. I'll see your things there.
Thank you so much, Doc. I appreciate you making some time to help us out.
I appreciate you for having me on, Brad. I'll love to come back sometime.
Hey, appreciate it, brother.